Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 8 entitled Consequences, and we're going to, our key idea this week is after Joshua's death, Israel fell into a cycle of sin, judgment, confession, and restoration. And we're going to be in Judges chapter 2, verses 11 through 23. We're going to start off by asking the question, what factors might cause people to break their commitments, and how can we guard against this in our own lives? What causes people to break commitments? It could be circumstances pop up and they either need to break them for job or a trip or an emergency or something like that, or it could be forgetfulness or carelessness or things like um, just a lack of respect for the person that they have made a promise to. And so we're going to see how Israel actually begins breaking their commitment with the Lord because of a generational gap that occurs after the older generation of Israel, those who have gone in to claim the promised land, after those elders, Joshua and his contemporaries, after they pass away, the generation that comes after them, they don't know what the Lord has done for them. And so they fall into this pattern that we just mentioned: sin, judgment, confession, and restoration. And this continues for a long time, really, even until today, they are still going through this. They do it up until the time of Jesus, they do it well after the time of Jesus. But it suffice it to say, intending to do well doesn't always result in something being well done. We recognize this to be true regarding the people of Israel when Joshua died and the era of the judges began. Before Joshua's death, the Israelites insisted that they would be faithful to the Lord and never worship the gods of the Canaanites. However, as soon as Joshua and the elders who served alongside of him died, Israel broke their promise and suffered the consequences of their infidelity to the Lord. And so, chapter 2 of Judges really serves as um, like the prelude or the overture of the entire book of Judges. Chapter 1 is context about who all um, came after Joshua, who all got buried in the promised land, those things. And then chapter 2 really is just a this is what happened with the nation of Israel. And then the later chapters go into more in detail of each individual judge, or at least the high points and low points of the judges of Israel. Within this book, we will see Samson. I don't know if we'll see that in our study specifically, but I know that Samson is a yes. Session 11, just a few weeks away, is about Samson. Um, and he is one of the judges. Gideon was a judge. Deborah was a judge. She was a female judge. And we're going to see all of these names over the next few weeks. But what I'm about to read in chapter 2 really encompasses the whole thing, the whole idea of the book of Judges. It's all just kind of overviewed, overtured, prologue to it. So, just some context. Joshua has died. Caleb is still alive, or but he's going to pass away soon. But Eleazar has died, the high priest, and all of these people have been buried. And what's happening is a new generation rose up who did not know the Lord or the works he had done for Israel. This generation abandoned the Lord and began worshiping the gods of the surrounding peoples in Canaan. And instead of ridding the land of Canaanites, Israel became like the Canaanites. Chapter 1 lists all of the houses of Israel's failures in getting rid of the people that in the land that they inherited. So it's like literally there's one chapter or one section heading that was the other failures of Israel, or the failures of the other houses of Israel, and it's really quite sad to read. But today we're going to see the beginning of this cyclical nature of sin, judgment, confession, and restoration that just goes on and on and on for thousands of years in the life of Israel. So the Israelites, chapter 2, verse 11. The Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. They worshiped the Baals and abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed the other gods from the surrounding peoples and bowed down to them. They angered the Lord, for they abandoned him and worshipped Baal and the Ashtoreths. The Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he handed them over to marauders who raided them. He sold them to the enemies around them, and they could no longer resist their enemies. Whenever the Israelites went out, the Lord was against them and brought disaster on them, just as he had promised and sworn to them, so they suffered greatly. The Lord raised up judges who saved them from the power of their marauders, but they did not listen to their judges. Instead, they prostituted themselves with other gods, bowing down to them. They quickly turned from the way of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. They did not do as their ancestors did. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for the Israelites, the Lord was with him and saved the people from the power of their enemies while the judge was still alive. The Lord was moved to pity whenever they groaned because those who were oppressing them and afflicting them. Whenever the judge died, the Israelites would act even more corruptly than their ancestors, following other gods to serve them and bow and worship to them. They did not turn from their evil practices or their obstinate ways. The Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he declared, because this nation has violated my covenant that I made with their ancestors and disobeyed me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I did this to test Israel to see whether or not they would keep the Lord's way by walking in it as their ancestors had. The Lord left these nations and did not drive them out immediately. He did not hand them over to Joshua. So first we see the evil that Israel did. This is verses 11 through 15. The Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. That word evil indicates a moral bankruptcy or a spiritual sickness that Israel had because they were taking these other idols of the nations around them. They worshiped the Baals and abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed the other gods from the surrounding peoples and bowed down to them. They angered the Lord, for they abandoned him and worshipped Baal and the Ashtoreths. So Baal was the primary god of the Canaanites and ruled the weather and the crops. Ashtoreth was his female consort who ruled war and was also the goddess of fertility. The Lord's anger burned against Israel. This wording suggests a blazing anger. He was so angry because previously, if you look back at what we looked at last week, Joshua told Israel that the Lord is a jealous God and that he would not tolerate idolatry, but they did it anyway. And so he handed them over, still in verse 14, to marauders or raiders or marauders. I mean, that's the best. Pirates, land pirates is another good word or similar idea to this, who raided them. He sold them to the enemies around them, and they could no longer resist their enemies. Whenever the Israelites went out, the Lord was against them and brought disaster on them, just as he had promised and sworn to them. So they suffered greatly. Remember, the Lord told them exactly what would happen if they did not obey, if they did not remain faithful to him, that he would be against them. And he is here. He's faithful to his word. Is his favor on them? No. But like I mentioned last week, he is always faithful. That is never a question. But he's not always favorable toward Israel because of their disobedience. So what factors contribute to a person or a group abandoning God? Forgetfulness, time, or selfish desires, the time passing between parents and grandparents and parents and children and grandchildren who are maybe not doing the best at explaining what happened or keeping that oral tradition. That's certainly what happened here, is that the oral tradition was not respected well by this younger generation, and they became more of a secular society and falling away from the Lord. So there are many factors that can contribute to that. The world constantly progresses and progresses to the left politically, and new ideas get thrown out, new ideas get thrown out, new ideas get thrown out, and people go, well, if this is okay, then this should be okay, and if that's okay, then this should be okay, and the world just falls into more and more moral failure. And so that is happening in Israel. They're being influenced by outside religions. They're being influenced by these other nations which is leading to their downfall. And so then we begin to see this cycle of sin, judgment, confession, and restoration. I always forget the judgment word, which shouldn't be too hard because it's literally in our title or our book for the next few weeks. So verses 16 through 19. The Lord raised up judges who saved them from the power of the marauders, but they did not listen to the judges. Instead, they prostituted themselves, or they showed their spiritual infidelity and were like an unfaithful spouse to the Lord. Pursuing other gods was like pursuing a prostitute. And they were bowing down to these other gods. They quickly turned from the way of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. They did not do as their ancestors did. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for the Israelites, the Lord was with him and saved the people from the power of their enemies while the judge was still alive. The Lord was moved to pity. This is a deep emotion that longs to comfort someone. God was moved by the Israelites' suffering and their calls out to him. And so he raised up a judge as an act of compassion because of their groaning, because of those who were oppressing and afflicting them. Whenever that judge died, however, the Israelites would act even more corruptly. This conveys behavior that leads to ruin. Each generation drew closer and closer to destruction and behavior that led to destruction than the one before. They were following other gods to serve them and bow and worship to them. They did not turn from their evil practices or their obstinate, hard-headed ways. So what does God providing a deliverer tell us about God's character? Well, God is faithful. Even when he's not favorable toward us, he still provided a savior for us. That's true for us. Romans 5. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Let's see where that's found. Romans 5:8. I always get the Roman road mixed up. Romans 5:8. For God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's a good reminder. Well, in this, while they were still sinners, God raised up, judges to save them. The judges were judges legally. They would judge the nation of Israel, but they were also warriors. Samson was a warrior. Gideon was a warrior. Ehud, or one of these first ones, I believe it was Ehud. Judges 3. Ehud, that's what it is. Ehud, something like that. He was a warrior judge. He went and killed the king with a sword that he made himself, and that's a great, very graphic tale of the way Ehud saved Israel from the king that was over them at the time. So in this section, what does God's providing a deliverer tell us about God's character? Well, he has compassion on the people. He sent Jesus not just for Israel, but for the whole world, because he had finally reached the point, and that's not correct wording. God had always planned for Jesus to come, but the time for Jesus finally came. There we go. To save the world. Instead of another judge to save Israel, another king to save Israel, another prophet to save Israel, instead we have the Savior, not just for Israel, however, for Israel, yes, but also for the Gentiles, for the whole world. It shows us God's love. God loved Israel. He was still faithful to Israel, even though Israel was not behaving as they should toward the Lord. And so the Lord's anger was still burning against Israel, and he declared, this is verse 20, and this is a declaration against them. He declared, because this nation has violated my covenant that I made with their ancestors and disobeyed me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left behind when he died. Joshua lived to be 110 years old, but before he died, he was not able to drive out every nation. He was just too old to do it. But God says he left these people there in Israel to test Israel to see whether or not they would keep the Lord's way by walking in it as their ancestors did. Would they be faithful to continue to drive out those people of Canaan, to take the land for themselves as he had given it to them? The Lord left these nations and did not drive them out immediately. He did not hand them over to Joshua. So why is disobedience or sin such a big deal to God? Well, because it separates us from him. A disobedience is stems from a lack of faith in the Lord to do what he says, to do what he says, and for him to complete what he says he will do. And so that sin can spiral us away from God because we fall into a pattern of disobedience where we disobey God in something small, something a little bigger, something a little bigger, something a little bigger, and we find this morally corrupt spiral that happens within our own hearts. Sin begets sin, begets sin, begets sin, so to speak. And so think about a time when God has tested you. When and how has he done that? And how is your faith stronger as a result? That's a great question for us to think about, especially as we go into a time. This is our last Sunday school lesson as with Brother Richard as our pastor. And as we go into a time of interim and really unknown, how is God going to test us? How has he tested us in the past? And how are we going to be faithful to him from here on out? So I want us to be thinking about that as we go. Thank you so much for being with me today. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.